You're listening to Everyday Engineering, the City of Madison's engineering podcast, where we talk about infrastructure, complex topics explained simply, from the water that flows down your drain to the rain and snow that drains into the lakes, by way the curbs and streets we design. City engineering touches your life in so many ways, explained right now in Everyday Engineering. A pandemic, Wisconsin winter, a growing need, and time. All challenges city agencies took head on and overcame to whip together a temporary homeless shelter for single men in our community. Not only was the task a big bite, but the city pulled it off in 7 weeks. 7, yes. My name is Hannah Mohelnitzky. I'm the Public Information Officer for the City of Madison Engineering Division and your host of this podcast, and here to share how all of our city agencies pulled together in a tight pinch to help those in need it the most in our community. Linette Rhodes, Community Development Grants Supervisor, and Stephen King, the Engineering Division Facilities Services Coordinator, both here from the City of Madison. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Absolutely. So, Linette, can you get us started with sharing what you do for the city and what role you had in this temporary shelter?
Sure. So I am one of the managers in the city's Community Development Division. So I manage the city's what we call the Community Development Block Grant Unit. That unit gets all of the federal funds from HUD that support a lot of our housing policy and strategies. So that means that we oversee all of our homeless services. So previously, before the pandemic, Porchlight operated out of the basement of churches, mostly Grace Church on Main Street, and then we had 2 kind of overflow shelters. In probably around February, staff kind of started coming to me and talking about the need for space and social distancing, and what do we do when this pandemic hits Madison? So we began talking with the city's EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, with engineering, and said, okay, we have 2 strategies. 1, we started moving very vulnerable people into hotels, and 2, help us find a temporary shelter. And they did.
Wow. Stephen, what do you do and how did it cross with the temporary shelter for our listeners who aren't familiar with you?
Sure. So I am with the engineering division in our facilities group. We are the unit that kind of does all of the day-to-day maintenance in most, not all, but most of the city buildings, police stations, fire stations, engineering, streets. There's a whole list of them. So in our group, we have plumbers and electricians and, folks that can build and fix just about anything. We also have a custodial group that similarly cleans a lot of things. And so kind of those skills, when it came time to find a building and make it ready for this purpose, that group came, we were front and center in it.
Absolutely. And the initial ask, let's start at the beginning. So what was the initial ask and how did we respond? Who wants to start?
I'll start since I think we made the initial ask. Yeah. So I mentioned, we had the men's shelter was in the basement of churches. So we recognized, looking at the CDC guidance for making sure people were able to social distance, making sure people had access to restrooms, to wash your hands, stay safe, that kind of stuff. It is very difficult to just have that directive of stay home, wash your hands, when you don't have a home. So we recognize the need for expanded space and consolidating our services. So again, Porchlight was operating out of 3 basements, really being able to consolidate to one place and have their staff all come together. We knew that we would most likely be able to serve more individuals. And with the pandemic, knowing that housing was going to be a good concern, that we would have to make sure that people who are coming into homelessness have a place to go, we wanted to set up a larger shelter. We did start vetting lots of different places. We toured lots of different places. We reached out to other community partners, but ultimately it came down to the city really having to step up and take a city facility because time was kind of against us and we needed to do it quickly.
So we went from downtown, then we moved to Warner Park, correct?
Correct.
And then we went from Warner Park, which was perfectly fine, but we were outgrowing it, correct?
So yes, with winter coming, so we had colder weather coming. We did not know how the eviction moratorium was going to pan out. So kind of thinking about the future uses and the needs for shelter, Warner Park could serve about 135 men when we initially set it up. And we stayed about actually well below those numbers. I think we were averaging about 90 men a night at the Warner Park shelter. But we knew as cold weather came, that was going to increase. So we kind of looked at two possibilities: increasing space at Warner Park, but then again, we have some social distancing issues of kind of increasing those spaces there. And just making sure that we can have appropriate beds for the individuals. So that's when a second site search began through our engineering department.
And then that brings us to First Street.
To First Street, absolutely.
So what did we do?
Well,
what didn't we do?
What didn't
Stephen?
we do? So the challenge with First Street, and it was a challenge and kind of an opportunity all at once, is that the Fleet Services Division was actively in that building, still conducting their daily business as they had been for decades. But it just happened to work out that they were also going into a brand new building that had just opened up on the north side. And so what we did is basically, as they were moving out, literally as they were moving out, we were moving in behind them to bring the shelter, because the building did provide a lot more space and a lot more opportunity to serve this need in a positive way.
So then once we were in, our crews got busy doing all sorts. Can you kind of talk us through what did we do?
So kind of one of the most interesting ones that we did was, because this was a garage, a municipal garage where they fix cars and trucks, there weren't shower facilities or many bathroom facilities, because it's kind of a lightly staffed building in the use that it was designed for. But in a shelter use, we were going to need significantly more bathrooms and showers. So what we very quickly had to go learn about semi-trailers. Mm-hmm. So we bought 2 semi-trailers, one of which we turned into a restroom trailer, and the other we turned into a shower trailer. And we did it that way because in the future, when we move to the next location, wherever that may be, we can kind of just pick up and bring our bathrooms with us.
Sure.
And that makes, because it's not an uncommon problem for the bathrooms to be in, not up to the level that a shelter would need in a building. So yeah, we had to learn about what are the differences in semi-trucks. We ended up with what's called a reefer, which is an old refrigerated semi-truck, and we did that because it had thicker walls that we could, bolt things to, and would stand up a little better.
So pop-up shower, pop-up bathrooms.
Yep, absolutely.
Because we needed those facilities to support the amount of people that we were going to be hosting in this space.
Correct.
So then on top of that, then we also, everything from things like bathroom and shower to bunk beds.
Yep.
How almost 250?
Yeah, we can so we ended up purchasing a whole lot of bunk beds, and so that was a challenge to get that through the purchasing process.
Sure.
Then we also had to do one of the other silly ones that was just, we never thought about it until we were neck deep in it, was because this has been a garage for 50 years or some number of decades. Yeah,
right.
Very long time. The floor, as you can imagine, was kind of a mess.
Yes.
Oil and tires and whatnot had been in there. So it took quite a cleaning effort to get the building ready. And it was power washing and then a garage scrubber and a street sweeper and the whole nine. So we really had to get creative with getting the building ready.
Yes, I think that was when I went to visit and kind of capture the madness that was happening. Wonderful madness of hard work was we were, filling in the cracks, setting up the bunk beds, making sure everything was clean, sanitized, everything. This building is huge. And so making sure that it is safe, clean, and ready to be lived in, at least for a temporary perspective, is a huge undertaking. And all of this whole process, 7 weeks, that's unheard of. To be able to flip a space to be livable in that amount of time, it took everything that we had, didn't it? Can you speak to the cross agency work that this took? It's pretty remarkable.
So I think I was also very stunned of the work that engineering did, and when I walk through the building, always surprised, and so always going to be thankful for them. So where we really kind of come together is the city's community development division really is some of the funding source for this. And so we also have to be on the same page of what do we have funding for, what do we have the capacity for, and then what are they able to do? And sometimes those are good conversations, sometimes those are bad conversations. But really, we are making sure that we have a contractor that can run that space. So the city is very proud that we set this up. We couldn't do it with Porchlight and other service providers that are encouraging people now to go to First Street. I think, that's the key is there's a lot of unknowns. Individuals who are homeless don't know sometimes that the shelter has moved around the city. So we've had a lot of community partners who have, talked about this new space, have talked up this new space because they've done such a wonderful job of renovating it, that more people are starting to feel comfortable going into this shelter setting, that Porchlight's been able to lower some of the barriers of entering into shelter because of this space that they've set up.
Sure. Let's talk about the need a little bit. Bigger picture here. What is the need for homeless services in the city of Madison right now?
Sure. So, the pandemic has really kind of, changed the numbers for us a bit. I was just actually talking to Stephen before of pre-pandemic. If someone would have said, what is the need of beds in our community? We probably would have said, we need a shelter of maybe 165 beds of, serving men throughout winter. Currently, right now, even though, the First Street is set up for 250 beds, we only have an average about 110 men using that shelter. So we have space that we can continue to house men, but we have 140 single men also staying in hotels in our community. So that is another program that we operate with Dane County of putting high-risk people into hotels and keeping them out of the shelter system. If we didn't have that program, we would be at our 250 mark during this pandemic. So, moving forward and thinking about the national statistics had told us that the pandemic would increase homelessness by 40%. We have seen exactly that. And so we need to move forward. We need a permanent site for a men's shelter. I think we can all agree in our community that going back to the churches and going back into basements is not what we need to see in our community. So the city is moving forward, again, with Dane County on those next steps of purchasing a building, getting it set up, looking at least, a spot for 250 men to have a place to not only stay at night, but also we aim to make sure that they can have support services around them 24/7.
I think that gives purpose to what we do here in engineering. I mean, I think a lot of people,
God, yes.
I think on the surface, when you hear engineering and we're doers, we get it done, we build it, we maintain it. Someone's got to build it, someone's got to clean it, somebody's got to maintain, and get it done. But when you're putting together a project like this one that really hits purely, as cliche as it sounds, home, and really has some serious life-changing impacts on people, it really does make a difference.
Absolutely.
I guess, how does that make the work different?
I think the work that we do is very important and critical anyway. Everything that engineering does is very important to kind of the functioning of our city. But this one felt perhaps a little more immediate, that when we walked out of there, people were going to literally be coming in off the street and having a place to sleep and get a warm meal. And that really did kind of, it put some force behind it. It felt a little different, much more urgent.
Could you tell with the crews?
Oh, absolutely. I could tell with the crews. It was the sort of situation where, no wasn't in anybody's vocabulary. It was, okay, how are we going to figure it out and do it? And it did. I mean, it was a project that kind of stretched us pretty thin. It was a big lift, but we were able to get it done. And I think that extra motivation was part of why.
And the use since has been, I mean, you mentioned, 100, 110. It's a lot of people. in a space, and I know we have space, but also considering, I don't think people often associate staying in a hotel as homeless per se. But I guess, can you give an idea of what it means to be homeless in the city of Madison right now? I guess to help quantify and help people understand the serious need, because I think if we don't hit it on the head, we don't know accurately what it really means. We just have this idea of what if it hasn't ever impacted someone or in any way.
Yeah, I can tell you of the situations that we hear about of individuals, and right now it's a scary situation to be homeless in Madison. It's full of anxiety. If you're in a hotel, or you're even individuals that are unsheltered right now. I mean, there are individuals who right now are nervous and scared. There is a pandemic that is happening, and they do not know how it will affect them. We know that people who are homeless most likely are at higher risk of having impacts because of COVID-19, because of previous health conditions. So I think there is anxiety, and there's fear, and there's the unknown. I think not just people who are homeless, we have a lot of people in our community who also are just facing housing insecurity. And so I think that, the more that we can support our community organizations and making sure that we can keep people in their homes. We know that the CDC eviction moratorium was extended, but we need landlords to continue to work with their tenants, because if somebody is unable to keep their housing and they do not have any other resources or family support around them, they are going to go into this system. And what we have found right now is people are staying homeless just a little bit longer. So because even if somebody has, let's say, a voucher that's going to help pay for future rent, again, the pandemic is making it much more harder to access that housing on the back end. So, we need that flexibility. We need landlords to kind of work with us of units that might be available, helping us move families and these singles out of this system so that we can create more space.
Yes. And speaking of space, we're also putting together a shelter for families and children at Carmenta Center. Can you kind of talk about that? And engineering is involved with that as well.
We roped them in. They thought that they were not only going to say, hey, Linette, here's our plan, but we've roped them in there as well.
Yes, so as we're wrapping up, but let's share, as moving forward, what's going on at Carmenta and how will that help our community as well?
Sure, so as First Street has been set up as the temporary men's shelter, right now for families, we do have all families staying in a hotel at this time. So again, to create space, Salvation Army turned their building on East Washington into a 24/7 single women's facility and moved the families out. We have just determined that we need a longer term solution for the families during this pandemic, and while Salvation Army redevelops the site that they're at now. They've already gotten approval from the city of Madison to build a purpose-built shelter at their East Washington location. And so the city moved forward of purchasing, and we do now own the building on Milwaukee Street, so that we can move the families out of hotels. Their Salvation Army will move all of their case management services to that building. So we'll have better support systems for the families, much more open spaces of open dining where services can be held and more interaction can happen for the families and the children. And so we anticipate that Salvation Army will be there probably mid-March of this year and stay for at least 3 to 5 years. And then they would move into another purpose-built facility. And then the city would move forward with turning Milwaukee Street into some other additional use.
Sure. So work continues, Stephen.
Work continues. The building's been vacant for a couple of years now, and it needed some TLC to get it back up and running, for this purpose. And so that's what we're in the middle of right now.
So that means electrical work, plumbing work.
Absolutely. Flushing the pipes, make sure the water's safe, checking the roof, taking care of dead trees that had come up on the property, checking all the outlets, making sure everything's working, that the lights turn on, that the switches work, just a lot of all of those little details, but it ended up being quite a list. And we're through the biggest chunk of it. We're they're not quite done yet. There's still, again, kind of interestingly enough, the showers were the big challenge at this point, and we're working through that right now.
Especially as, again, time continues
Yes.
to be a pressure point, but nothing we can't handle.
Right, absolutely.
Anything else? Last question. I guess as we look forward to the future, what are we hopeful for? What are the game plan? What are we? Anything else that I didn't ask you that you want to mention as we look forward into the future here in the city of Madison?
I would just say, I think, this pandemic really has put a spotlight on the need for homeless services. We were just putting a Band-Aid on some of our solutions before, and we need to continue having conversations about what we can do better in the future. We have not purchased the site for the permanent men's shelter yet, but I think we are all in recognition that we need a site, and if we don't come together as a community and continue to spotlight this need, we're just kind of going to take a step back instead of a step forward. So I think that's my main takeaway from the pandemic was we need to create solutions for our most vulnerable populations. Otherwise, no one is paying attention.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is, I had never, I was fortunate enough to never had seen the basement at Grace prior to this project.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was an incredible thing that the churches did, providing that for, the community for so long. But having walked through there, as part of these projects, it really brought home the need for this service, that it really was just a church basement, and that's not a sufficient place for, the services that this community requires to get them where they need to be.
Absolutely.
So-
Well, thank you both for all of what you have done for the community, our city, and our colleagues, and helping lead this. This is a really important topic that we'll continue to shine a light on and keep the conversation going. Thank you for being here today. If you have a question and you're listening to this and you want us to discuss or share more information about anything on this podcast or anything city related or engineering related, please send us a message on the City of Madison Engineering Facebook page, because we're here for you every day in engineering.